Even now, decades later, the story survives only in fragments, official reports sealed away, photographs locked in dusty archives, neighbors who turn pale at the mention of their names. But fragments are enough. They whisper a truth that towns and families across America know too well. Secrets can be buried, but they never stay silent forever. What makes this case so haunting is not only what happened inside that locked room, but what it reveals about human silence outside it. Parents who would rather lock a door than face shame, neighbors who would rather pretend than intervene, authorities who would rather file away records than confront the uncomfortable. Every layer of society became part of the prison. The siblings may have been the ones behind the walls, but the town itself was equally trapped. The last reliable record of them describes a hospital bed, two bodies lying side by side, hands clasped together, even in sleep. Staff had grown used to it. One nurse, in a moment of pity, described it not as grotesque but as unbreakable. She said they seemed less like people and more like two halves of one shadow. When one stirred, the other did. When one smiled faintly in sleep, the other's lips curled in the same way. To separate them would have been to erase them. In the end, no court ruling or medical intervention changed their fate. They were not rehabilitated, not reabsorbed into society, not transformed into something the world could recognize. They remained what they had become, reflections of each other, forged in secrecy, bound in darkness, immune to the laws that tried to contain them. And so their story lingers as a warning about family, about silence, about the things that grow when doors are locked too long. We tell ourselves it is unimaginable, that it is a rare and terrible accident of history, but ask yourself honestly, how many locked rooms stand in the towns around you right now? How many secrets lie just beyond the walls we pass every day, sealed not with chains but with silence? Because history has taught us one thing: what hides in darkness will always demand to be found, and when it is, the question will not be whether you can handle the truth, it will be whether the truth can handle you. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you have exposed the truth or sealed the door again? Because what happened next wasn't the clean resolution people wanted. There were no heroic rescues, no clear path back to normal life. The siblings remained together, and in doing so, they remained outside the grasp of those who tried to define them. Attempts at reintegration into society failed. Jobs ended quickly when they refused to separate. Temporary foster arrangements collapsed within days. Even medical staff began to admit that whatever bond existed between them was beyond the reach of law or therapy. What frightened officials most was the idea of lineage. Blood tests revealed that the siblings had produced a child years before their discovery. The infant had not survived, and the remains were found buried in the basement of the family home, wrapped in a cloth too small to be anything but handmade. The discovery silenced any doubt. What had grown in that locked room was not only devotion, but generation. The cycle had already begun. Experts debated the implications, some arguing that isolation had warped natural instincts into obsession, others insisting that the siblings represented an ancient truth about human nature, a return to something primal and forbidden. But beneath the arguments lay the same unease. This was not simply about one family. It was about the darkness people are willing to ignore when it festers in plain sight. The siblings themselves seemed untouched by the storm around them. Court hearings, medical examinations, endless questions, all met with the same serene calm. When pressed about the child in the basement, the brother lowered his eyes and the sister whispered, "We kept them safe, away from the world." To them, it was not a confession, it was a declaration. The town no longer speaks of them. The house was demolished, the land left empty, as if erasing the structure might erase the memory. But memories don't vanish so easily. They cling to silence, to shadows, to the uneasy knowledge that behind any closed door might lie a truth too unbearable to face. And still, somewhere in America, Records show that the brother and sister lived on, together, refusing separation until the end. Whether they were captives or conspirators remains a question that will never be answered. By now, the story had slipped beyond the boundaries of a small American town. Newspapers carried headlines that blurred the line between horror and fascination. Some labeled it a tale of captivity, others whispered of a love that defied bloodlines. But beneath the sensationalism lay something far darker, a question about what human beings become when stripped of the world outside and left only with themselves. Authorities struggled with what to do. Rehabilitation programs were suggested, therapy sessions scheduled, but each effort collapsed against the immovable wall of the siblings' devotion. In group therapy, they refused to speak. In individual sessions, they grew mute, eyes darting toward the door as if listening for the other's presence. They ate only when allowed to sit side by side. They slept only when they could reach across the bed and touch each other's hand. It was dependence perfected into ritual, ritual hardened into faith. Researchers studied their case for years, publishing articles in obscure journals about dyadic isolation syndrome and bond collapse prevention. But even the most clinical language could not disguise the deeper truth that the brother and sister had created their own world, one that rejected the laws of family, of morality, of God himself. And once a world like that has been built, no outsider can destroy it without also destroying the people inside. The town, meanwhile, recoiled from its own reflection. Churches preached sermons about sin and secrecy. Neighbors denied their silence, though everyone knew the truth of it. Some claimed ignorance, others insisted they thought the children had been sent away. Yet none could explain the supply deliveries, the flicker of lights in the window, the faint sounds that traveled on summer nights. Their denial was another prison, one of shame and complicity. Perhaps the most disturbing testimony only came from a young deputy assigned to monitor the siblings in their new housing facility. He reported hearing them whisper at night, even when placed on opposite sides of the room. He swore the whispers matched, words spoken in perfect unison, though their mouths barely moved. On his final shift, he wrote a note in the logbook. "They don't belong to us. They never did. They belong only to each other." And it was this realization, chilling in its simplicity, that left many wondering. Had the brother and sister been victims of a family's cruelty, or had they embraced something that was always waiting to be uncovered? Rumors began to spread faster than any official report. Some said the siblings were never separated after their discovery, that officials feared what might happen if they were torn apart. Others claimed they were institutionalized, placed in a psychiatric ward where their bond only deepened in secrecy. The truth was stranger still. Records show that after initial medical examinations, the siblings resisted every attempt at separation. When confined to different rooms, they grew violent, clawing at walls, refusing to eat, screaming each other's names until staff relented. In the end, it was decided they would remain together, as though the authorities themselves had become prisoners of the devotion they tried to break. Doctors documented their condition in clinical language: malnourishment, vitamin deficiencies, muscular atrophy, but no diagnosis could explain their eyes. Witnesses described them as wide, glassy, unblinking for long stretches, staring not with fear, but with something closer to possession. One nurse swore she saw them smile at the same moment, as though thoughts passed silently between them. Their movements were synchronized, their responses mirrored. Decades of isolation had fused them into something beyond brother and sister, beyond lovers, beyond even human categories. The case began to attract unwanted attention. Journalists descended on the town, desperate for details. Neighbors, once silent, now told stories in hushed voices, stories of strange noises heard at night, of deliveries made to the house long after the parents' deaths, of family members who avoided eye contact when asked about the missing children. The more people spoke, the more it became clear. This was not just a family tragedy. It was a communal one. Everyone had known something was wrong, everyone had chosen to look away. But the most haunting detail lay in the scraps of writing recovered from the locked room. Among the torn papers and scribbled notes, investigators found a passage repeated again and again in different handwriting styles. "We are one. We are not meant for them, we are meant for each other. Some versions ended with drawings, two figures without faces, bound together by a circle. Others included dates, suggesting anniversaries not of birthdays or holidays, but of moments known only to them. And when the siblings were finally asked why they never tried to escape, why they never broke the window, why they never screamed loud enough for the world to hear, the sister answered with a calmness that unsettled everyone in the room. Because out there, we are nothing. In here, we are everything. The town wanted answers, but answers only deepened the horror. Court documents revealed the siblings had been confined for more than a decade. 10 years in a single room, 10 years breathing the same stale air, 10 years with only each other. Psychologists who reviewed the case later called it social starvation, a condition where the lack of outside contact distorts human bonds until they become something unrecognizable. What would be considered unthinkable in normal life begins to feel natural when the outside world ceases to exist. Some investigators argued that the parents intended to shield the family name. Others believed they were punishing the children for a sin too shameful to admit. But no one could explain why. Long after the parents had died, the door remained locked from the outside. Food deliveries were found in the basement, canned goods, sacks of flour, bottles of water. Someone, perhaps a relative or loyal neighbor, had continued the ritual, sliding supplies through a slot in the wall without ever opening the door. The town's silence was no accident. It was complicity. Within the room, the brother and sister had created their own language. Scraps of writing suggested codes, words spelled backwards, symbols carved into the wood. One investigator described it as a private scripture, a religion of two believers. Their faith was in each other. They had no gods, no laws, no world beyond those four walls. To them, love and survival had fused into one. When the siblings were questioned, their voices were soft, almost childlike, despite their adult faces. They spoke rarely, glancing at one another before answering. One officer later wrote in his report that it felt as if they were not speaking to outsiders at all. They were performing for each other, as though every sentence needed silent approval. It wasn't just dependence, it was worship. The press tried to sensationalize the case, painting them as monsters, a grotesque byproduct of incest and confinement. But those who had entered the room knew better. They weren't monsters, they were victims of control, secrecy, and a culture that preferred to whisper than confront what was happening behind closed doors. And yet, the longer one studied them, the more it became clear. Their tragedy had reshaped them into something outside of victimhood, something more dangerous. They were no longer bound by society's rules. They had lived too long without them. The family name had weight once. Old photographs in yellowing albums showed proud faces standing in front of the very house that now rotted. A father with stern eyes, a mother with a fixed smile, children in Sunday clothes. To the neighbors, they were respectable, maybe too respectable. Their curtains were always drawn, their greetings short, their gatherings private. People whispered that they kept to themselves, but in small towns, silence is sometimes easier than asking questions. When the truth began to seep out, investigators pieced together a story that read less like history and more like nightmare. The parents had been the keepers of the secret. It was they who locked the room, they who decided which truths could be seen by the outside world. Reports suggested that the children, brother and sister, were shut away before adulthood. Some say it began when the father caught them together. Others insist it was punishment for behavior the family could not admit to. But punishment turned into permanence, and soon the locked door became their reality. Neighbors recalled the family's sudden disappearance from public life. One year, the children simply stopped appearing at school. Explanations were vague: illness, homeschooling, a move out of town. But no official records supported these stories. Birth certificates went unrenewed. School documents fell into silence. It was as if the brother and sister had been erased, deliberately buried under layers of falsehood. The room itself bore evidence of years gone by. Old toys, broken and chewed, scattered in a corner, pages torn from magazines pasted to the walls, forming crude windows into a world they were not allowed to see. A single lamp, its cord frayed, provided the only light. And on the floor, beneath years of dust, officers discovered something more haunting. Handwritten notes, small scraps of paper exchanged between the two. The handwriting shifted from childish scrawl to the shaky lines of adulthood, but the words remained strangely consistent. Pleas, promises, confessions. Each note suggested not only survival, but a bond that grew darker the longer they were locked away. What unsettled the investigators most was not the condition of the room, but the way the siblings sat together when found. Not frantic, not violent, not even relieved. They sat calmly, side by side, fingers intertwined, as though the intrusion of the outside world was the true violation. It was then that authorities realized this was not merely captivity. This was devotion, and devotion of this kind is the most dangerous secret a family can bury. They said the house was abandoned. From the outside, it looked like so many others in America's forgotten towns, windows sealed with dust, wooden boards curling from years of damp rot, silence so heavy that even birds seemed to avoid its eaves. But behind those locked walls, a secret had been festering for decades, a story too shameful for neighbors to speak aloud, a story that began with a brother, a sister, and a room that should never have been sealed shut. When authorities finally forced their way inside, the stench hit first. A smell like damp soil mixed with something human, sour and old, as though time itself had decayed within those walls. The officers expected squatters or the remnants of a forgotten family. What they found instead made several of them walk back outside, unable to breathe, unable to process. Because in that locked room, two figures sat pressed against the wall, pale and thin as shadows, eyes that did not blink in rhythm with the living. The room told its own story before they spoke a word. The walls were scratched, notched with marks like desperate calendars, hundreds of them. A single mattress lay on the floor, sunken deep at its center, with blankets stiff from years of unwashed use. Glass jars lined one corner, filled with cloudy liquid that should have been discarded long ago. The curtains were drawn tight, and when pulled back, the sunlight struck like a foreign invasion, causing both figures to squint, recoil, as though they had not seen daylight in years. Whispers spread quickly through the town. No one wanted to believe it. The brother and sister weren't strangers, not to this community. People remembered them from years ago, quiet children always together, walking side by side, sometimes holding hands longer than siblings should, and then, one day, they vanished. Parents said they had moved away. Teachers said they transferred school to girls. But truth lingers like smoke in an old chimney. You can board it up, you can deny it, but the scent never fully disappears. This discovery wasn't just shocking. It was a wound ripped open, exposing not only the family's secret, but the town's silence, a silence that had lasted for generations. And as investigators began to uncover what truly happened in that room, they realized something chilling. This was not a sudden crime of madness. This was planned, preserved, protected.